woman.
Absolutely, the tomboy girl.
Yes, exactly.
Isn't just a tomboy girl likely to grow up to be a happy heterosexual woman and mother, or potentially a happy lesbian. No, the tomboy girl actually is a boy in hiding, in waiting, who we must then give drugs to. And we must then medically experiment on. And we must, for instance, let's not beat around the bush, flay the arm, for instance, in order to create something that approximates a penis. Now, this is all presented as if this is the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth, just for a moment, if I may, focusing on the extraordinary letdown this is by the adults of the children. Because one of the things that happens in childhood is that you try to work out what is the realm of magic and what is the realm of reality. In your single digits and even into your double digits, you're trying to work out whether the stories are in some way true. Now, in every single case, you learn that the realm of magic is not true. But imagine if the adult world told you, in some realms it is, and that you may not be able to wave a wand and fly, but if you wave a wand, you could become the opposite sex. It's quite straightforward, really. You can choose. You can choose. It's quite easy. People just choose. You could be a boy this, a girl this way.
Douglas Murray is at it again, and this time he's exposing the double standards the West has for its own self. Watch as he exposes how the West champions oppressive regimes while indulging in dangerous self-loathing, all the while committing intellectual suicide.
First of all, gender, race and identity. You talk about this as being basically a form of new ideology or a new religion.
Yeah.
Can you explain a bit about that?
Well, I'd noticed in recent years, as I'm sure you and many others have, that almost every day's news was about, or very significantly about, issues of identity. It was people's careers being over because, for instance, they had nicked one of what I recognized to be the tripwires. It was people demanding a new recognition of a particular identity. And there are others I could have put in, but the four that I realized they were most centered around was everything to do with being gay, everything to do with women, particularly relations between the sexes, everything to do with race, and absolutely everything to do with trans, which is the most recent of these rights claims. Now, I should stress that I think in all of these cases, we live in the most free, most liberal, in the proper sense, societies in the world. And to live in this society now is to live not just in the most fortunate society in the world at the moment, but the most fortunate society in the world ever. So why was it that all of these things, which have never been better anywhere, ever, should have increasingly been portrayed as if we lived in the most repressive, oppressive, patriarchal, white supremacist societies in the world? Societies which, as a result, needed, if not to be brought down completely, then to be completely changed. And I started to notice that there were common patterns going on. And I stress that this is not to overstate things.
Douglas Murray exposes the absurdity. The West, a beacon of tolerance, is smeared as oppressive, while real oppression thrives elsewhere. Iran kills women for showing hair. Gay people face death in 13 Islamic countries. Yet our activists fight over pronouns. Gaza's Christian population has plummeted from 40,000 to 1,000 under Hamas. Where's the outrage? Victimhood is now currency, but why do they ignore real atrocities? Perhaps oppression needs Wi-Fi and Netflix specials to matter.
What's behind this is the most serious attempt, I think, since the end of the Cold War, to come up with a comprehensive explanation and justification for what we are doing here.
Yeah.
After all, you know, I addressed a bit of this in The Strange Death of Europe, but it's highly unlikely that we are going to be the first people in human history to require no explanation for our presence on Earth and not need anything to do. Now, my view is that historically we recognize that when the economics goes wrong, other things follow. We know this from the French Revolution. We know this from every period in history. And we've been very reluctant to recognize that when the financial system went wrong in 2008, something else happened in its wake. Other things start to go wrong in the culture. My view is, as I explain in the book, that in the wake of the financial crisis, it isn't clear, for instance, why young people who can't accumulate capital should have an instinctive love of capitalism. Or to put it another way, it's not clear to me that people who don't see any likelihood of ever getting on the property ladder won't find themselves attracted to a system which claims to be able to solve every inequity on earth. Yeah. It's got something going for it, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And my view, as I explain, is that post-2008, what we see is that there are ideas around, of course there are ideas around all the time, and this idea, the intersectionalism, the identity politics, the weaponization of identity, have been around in this form since at least the 60s, 70s, been worked on in the 80s at American universities. It's a demonstrable nonsense. I explain, I try to pick it apart in this book. But perhaps when the economics goes wrong, our whole system becomes highly vulnerable to bad ideas.
Murray nails it. When wallets empty, minds welcome nonsense. Post-2008, while millennials couldn't afford homes, universities peddled victimhood as the new currency. Funny how leftist professors preaching equity from ivory towers forget Venezuela's socialist paradise, where inflation hit 686.4% in 2021. Want to see real inequality? Check Gaza, where Hamas leaders live in Qatar's luxury while their people suffer. Economics gone wrong, try woke gone worse.
And I think that's one of the things that's been happening. And into the system in the last 10 years has flooded these claims about LGBTQI issues, about women issues, about racial issues. And just in case anyone thinks I'm obsessing about a liberal arts college issue on the west coast of America, I would just say, in a country like Britain or America, the only people who don't think this is coming for them are people who are self-employed.
Yes, yeah.
Anyone who works in government, anyone who works in local authority, anyone who works in private organizations, in public companies, will know that increasingly issues in our society are not to do with people's competencies. They're to do with their identity issues. It's whether or not we have the right identity mix. Now, there's an awful lot going on there, but one of the things I try to show is this is an unwinnable game.
Yes.
Unwinnable.
It seems to many people, Douglas, I think you've already alluded to it there, but it seems to many people that this has suddenly come. It seems to have suddenly arrived. You mentioned the 2008 financial crisis there, but it was a long time of brewing, but it has been incredibly quick, hasn't it? Yes,
well, as I say, the origins of it lie some way back, but it does seem to have flooded through the system. I demonstrate the way in which in the last 10 years this goes into the system, and then in the last 5 years becomes highly weaponized, highly weaponized. Obviously, particularly in the wake of the Brexit and Trump votes, where there's an added political utility to weaponizing these things.
Welcome to Corporate Clown World and TM, where merit died and pronouns got promoted. While Hamas launches rockets, Western HR departments launch diversity workshops. Fortune 500 companies spent $9.3 billion on DEI in 2022, yet NASA's diversity hire couldn't multiply. Remember when competence mattered? Now it's all about checking boxes. Meanwhile, Israel's tech sector thrives on merit, producing more NASDAQ companies than all of Europe combined. Coincidence? Tell me about systemic oppression again.
But yes, I mean, until the last 10 years, things like LGBTQI were not on the agenda. That we knew about gay rights, and in the same way, gay rights, women's rights, and equal racial rights for everyone, whatever their skin color, had pretty much arrived, I would submit, now of course lots of people contest this, but I would submit by the late 20th century and the early part of this century, had arrived at something like their desired destination. And the desired destination was equal. And as I see it in recent years, this has been like watching a train drawing into a station, the desired destination. And then suddenly, just as it's drawing in, gets a head of steam, goes shooting off down the tracks, off the tracks, and starts scattering bodies in its wake. Why, when gay rights have never been better, are they portrayed as if they've never been worse? Why, when women have never been freer and able to make choices about their lives, is everything about the lack of opportunity for women and the discrimination that people see against women? Why do we hear talk of the patriarchy at the least plausible time in human history to do such talk? Why do we see the weaponization of gay people against straight people, of women against men, of black people against white people, and trans against absolutely everyone? Why? What's actually going on? And I think there's a number of things going on, but one of them is simple brute politics, brutal politics. Perhaps it's an image that people don't want in their heads, but trans is the one that gives this thing away. And I think in recent years, the radical left has used transsexuals as a battering ram.
Right, yes.
A battering ram. Yeah. For what? For several things.
Talk about peak delusion. While women in Iran face execution for dancing, Western feminists cry patriarchy from their corner offices. Fun fact, Western women lead 167 Fortune 500 companies, while Saudi Arabia just let them drive in 2018. The LGBTQ+ grievance train keeps rolling, despite 71% public approval. Yet silence about Qatar's World Cup, where being gay means jail. Murray's right, it's not about rights anymore, it's about power. Who needs reality when victimhood pays better?
One is, and you can see it with complete predictability across the system, trans is used by people who want to do something else. I'm not referring to trans individuals who, broadly speaking, want to just live their lives like everyone else. But I'm talking about the people who you can predict with absolute certainty will agree to whatever the latest claim is. Broadly speaking, they are people who want to wage a conflict on the patriarchal, white, cis, heteronormative, capitalist, democratic societies that we live in.
Actually, that's an important point, because you mentioned the book. You know, in the past, when there was a kind of diagram of oppression, you know, capitalism was at the top, and then you had, you know, the workers or whatever. Now, capitalism is still at the top, but you have a different hierarchy of groups that are apparently being oppressed, which is
what I say. So as you know, I do each of these landmine issues one by one: gay, women, race, trans. But they have interludes in between them to explain what I think the things going on underneath are. And that's why I have an interlude on the Marxism issue, because you can see the Marxist substrates in a lot of this. I mean, as you say, the pyramid of oppression. Capital is still at the top, money, finance. But this time, instead of the rest of the pyramid being supported merely by the workers and the working class on whose noble shoulders the middle class were, and then the upper, then the aristocrats and the bishops and so on. This is another form of the pyramid of oppression, but it involves these minority groups. Now, by the way, lest anyone think that I'm some conspiracy theorist on this, I cite at considerable length some of the Marxist scholars who make this completely plain.
Welcome to Oppression 2.0, where Marxism got a rainbow makeover. While actual oppressors like Hamas use children as human shields, Western activists battle microaggressions. Marx's workers' paradise flopped, so now they're repackaging failure with pride flags. Meanwhile, capitalism lifted 1.1 billion from poverty since 1990. But sure, let's destroy that system because someone misgendered you. Makes perfect sense.
And I was staggered when I was looking into this at the completely frank way in which some of them write about this. Writers like Lachlan and Mouffe in the 80s are already writing that the working class have basically let us down. Remember, the working class didn't show up for the revolution on time. The working class were a big letdown if you were, a communist in Britain or America in the 20th century. So in the 80s, when they're still trying to work out why the best they've got to show for their horrible experiment is Yugoslavia or Romania, Albania. They're trying to work out why this has happened and why the working class is such a letdown. And they decide that we've got to get a new form of revolutionary class. And they are completely frank that they want to find it in minority groups. They want to find it in women, and one always has to stress that women are not a minority group, but nevertheless they're always packaged in with this. They want to find it in sexual minorities, and they want to find it in racial minorities. Now, there are certain problems in this, and Lachlan and Mouffe, among others, stress that there is a problem because the working class is likely to be racist. This is one of the problems that the communists always had. They always had a problem with the working class. This is just one of them. The working class will be racist, and they might not like some of our client groups. Well, this is just another contradiction we need to get over. And in this whole business of contradictions, we see part of the Marxist substructure, but we also see one of the things that the rest of us have to address. Because you and I might think that when you have two opposing things trying to go forward at the same time, one of them's got to give. That contradiction means one of them is wrong.
Yeah.
But one of the things that the Marxists always managed to do was to embrace the contradictions.
When the working class refused to revolt, leftists found new pawns. Today's trust fund revolutionaries, sipping $7 lattes, champion Hamas while condemning Israel's democracy. Irony, working class voters increasingly support conservative parties, while gender studies professors making $120K lecture about privilege. The same ideology that killed 100 million now wears designer labels and uses preferred pronouns. How's that for progress?
So I show with the intersectionalists, I show in somewhat gruesome detail, I think, in The Madness of Crowds, that intersectionalism claims that if you unlock one minority group, you unlock the lot.
Yeah.
So we live in a society that's patriarchal, white supremacist, cis heteronormative, etc., goes without saying. But these things are all interlocked, and if you could undo one, you would undo the whole thing. Now, I point out this is demonstrably wrong. Demonstrably wrong. For instance, trans runs against women, fundamentally. It happens to also run against men, but let's put that one off for another time. It runs fundamentally against women because you cannot claim that being a woman is a performative act which you just become if you would like to become, yet being trans is a hardware issue you have no say over. You can run one of those programs, you can't run both. I submit, and this has not, I think, previously been focused on enough, trans runs totally against gay. Totally against gay. It fundamentally undermines the central claims of the gay and lesbian liberation movements that have gone on over the last half century. So, the intersectionists say, but this will, or if you undo this, never mind the racial one. If you undo these, everything will come right. And I say, no. Since there is such clear and blatant contradictions, why don't you see that one of them has to give? Well, again, the intersectionists, because they're influenced by the Marxists, don't find this a problem like the rest of us would. And they don't think that as a result, maybe you have to re-estimate the whole thing.
The problem is, you see, if one, if they allow for one contradiction, then the whole thing falls down, doesn't it?
Yes.
This is the problem. I mean, for example, with the trans issue, which, I mean, you mentioned that this one seems to be, as you said earlier, a bit of a catalyst in a way. We had Rod Liddell on the programme, and he said this is the one that's going to tip people away, if you like, from this agenda in its claims.
Watch the oppression Olympics implode. While biological males sweep women's swimming records, feminists cheer their own erasure. Talk about scoring an own goal. Meanwhile, in the real world, Hamas throws gay Palestinians off rooftops, while Western activists defend them. The movement that claims to free everyone can't even define what a woman is. Biology is transphobic, but Islamic gender apartheid gets a pass. Peak cognitive dissonance has entered the chat.
For example, Douglas, 'cause you talk to trans people in the book, don't you? And for example, if there is a young boy who maybe has got quite feminine traits, he might grow up gay. Now, in an odd way, he would be oh, well, maybe actually you probably are trans, you should probably be a
Yes.
woman. So in other words, it's actually quite conservative, isn't it? It's saying you've got feminine characteristics, so therefore you must be a woman.
Absolutely. The tomboy girl
Yes, exactly.
isn't just a tomboy girl likely to grow up to be a happy heterosexual woman and mother, or potentially a happy lesbian. No, the tomboy girl actually is a boy in hiding, in waiting, who we must then give drugs to. And we must then medically experiment on. And we must, for instance, let's not beat around the bush, flay the arm, for instance, in order to create something that approximates a penis. Now, this is all presented as if this is the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's worth, just for a moment, if I may, focusing on the extraordinary letdown this is by the adults of the children. Because one of the things that happens in childhood is that you try to work out what is the realm of magic and what is the realm of reality. In your single digits and even into your double digits, you're trying to work out whether the stories are in some way true. Now, in every single case, you learn that the realm of magic is not true. But imagine if the adult world told you, in some realms it is, and that you may not be able to wave a wand and fly, but if you wave a wand, you could become the opposite sex. It's quite straightforward, really. You can choose. You can choose. It's quite easy.
Welcome to Wonderland, where adults tell kids they can change sex easier than Peter Pan could fly, while 88% of gender-confused youth naturally reconcile with their biological sex. Activists push permanent medical interventions. Stunning logic, tomboys must be boys, feminine boys must be girls. So much for smashing gender stereotypes. Meanwhile, Sweden and Finland restrict youth transitions after discovering, surprise, that irreversible medical decisions might need more than a TikTok diagnosis. Remember when adults protected children instead of experimenting on them?
People just choose. You could be a boy this, a girl this way. One of the main advocates of this in the US, who I quote in the book, describes this at one point in a hideous account I give. Says at one point, in reaction to the question of, well, what if people then have transitioned and then they don't want it? She says, well, you can get your breasts put back on again. Really?
Yeah, yeah.
What are we, Lego?
Yes, I know. It's extraordinary.
What are we made of? But this is the adults lying to children.
Yes, yes.
And I think that Rod is right that this may be a catalyst issue, despite being a minority issue, because there's several things with it. But just one of them is the parents know this isn't true. And, you know, Robert Conquest always said people are conservative about the things they know about.
That's right. Yeah.
Parents know about children. They know about their children. And so that's the first thing. But the second thing that's just worth highlighting quickly on that is the reason why the trans thing keeps on tripping people up. And I don't want it to sound like I'm being... I try in this chapter to think as carefully as possible through the various claims being made about trans, from intersex all the way through to the autogynephilic impulse, the sexual impulse, the desire to perhaps get off on this, all the way through to I am in the wrong body. And I try to weigh up the plausible things this because people aren't doing this enough in our society. They don't dare. But why is it the one that keeps tripping people up? Because among other things, and I realize this from academics and from scientists I've been speaking to in recent years, because this is the first time, like the realm of magic, that the scientific world has been invited to lie en masse.
When science meets ideology, truth gets cancelled. Medical professionals are now forced to deny basic biology or face career extinction. Remember when doctors took the Hippocratic Oath, not the hypocritical oath? Now, stating humans are sexually dimorphic is considered hate speech, while claiming breasts regrow like lizard tails passes peer review. The same institutions that demand follow the science TM for climate change suddenly get amnesia about chromosomes. Even Galileo had it easier. At least the church admitted Earth orbits the sun eventually.
Pretend that chromosomes are performative, that they don't really exist. Pretend the sciences are wrong and the social sciences are right.
I think the thing, Douglas, as well, that you're talking about how these things have been weaponized, and that seems entirely correct. But therefore, the idea that somehow this is sincere, that people just want to further the lives of minorities, the social justice warrior kind of argument. Would you say, therefore, that it is not actually sincere? It's all about basically, if you like, having a go at the white patriarchy?
My view is that there's different groups going on. There is one, as I say, that is absolutely clear a political force, a battering ram. These are the people who enter any public discussion with one aim, which is the hope that they can dishonestly misrepresent something somebody else has said as either homophobic, racist, sexist, or something else.
There are all these tripwires now, aren't there? All over the place.
They've laid them, and by the way, my self-appointed task in this book is to say I want to clear the minefield a bit. Yeah. I want to run into it and set off some of the mines in order that other people can too, because it is not possible in a free society that we cannot talk about all of the things that matter.
You have sort of actually, you've already run into the minefield since the book's been out, when we've had a couple of great examples that came along just after your book. We had the Justin Trudeau, thing, which was fascinating actually, because he is not, he is a social justice warrior actually in a way.
Yeah, the ultimate social justice warrior.
And also we had the thing with Sam Smith, and in fact you went on the Radio 4
program,
yeah, and I think someone came unstuck there, didn't you?
Yes, well I said live on air, which what 99.9% of the population know and would like to say, which is that non-binary doesn't exist. Yeah. It's not a thing, actually. Yeah.
Trudeau, who wore blackface so many times he lost count, lectures others about racism. Sam Smith declares non-binary, and suddenly basic grammar becomes hate speech. The same media that crucifies comedians for jokes celebrates biological males destroying women's sports records. Talk about doublethink. So any thoughts on what Douglas Murray just discussed? Share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you never miss any of our future debates.